Hey my friend, welcome to this video. My name is Kees. I've been a spiritual teacher for almost 5 years and I've been a coach for longer and I've been on this path for a very long time and had some beautiful insights and shifts which I have different videos about, which I'll link. I'm going to be reacting to the oldest video I could find of Jim Newman. His first maybe public video in 2014, and Jim Newman is a lovely human and a lovely spiritual teacher who I've spoken to twice, and I've been to his sessions in Amsterdam. I'm from Amsterdam, the Netherlands, in Europe, and he's a non-duality teacher. He is a student of Tony Parson. I'll be commenting and reacting to his first video, which I haven't seen for a long time. So here we go.
So this is being. This is life. This. Everything that's happening now is life, is being. It's all there is. Being has no function, has no intention, has no purpose.
So he goes immediately to the descriptive state that he's experiencing at that moment, right? Meaning he's not only pointing to the nature of reality, he's also pointing to his experience of that reality. And what he is experiencing at that moment is just pure reality, right? And he has the clarity about that to talk about that. So this radical non-duality, quote unquote, where you take the point of the absolute and talk about that absolute reality, when you have also experienced that, then that is really valid. Otherwise, it's just a story you tell, right? But he has obviously experienced that, or he is experiencing that at the moment. He's just describing his current state. And that's a beautiful way of pointing, because you're not going into any story, you're not going into the mind, you're not going into the perspective of the seeker, because there is no seeker with him. He's not seeking anymore. Right? So he's talking about his experience, and that is very powerful. And when you get to exchange with other people and you see these radical non-duality teachers, and you have quite many, hold the perspective of the absolute, while the relative, let's say the person, or there is no real person, but let's say that from the perspective of the seeker, there's a conversation trying to be had, which is very difficult when you're coming from the absolute, because then all these descriptions or these pointers will get to come out. And they're really beautiful if you see them as pointers from the absolute, and you don't really take them literally as, I need to now do this as a seeker. Because that's not what it is. It's just trying to get, to understand, to feel, or to click into the perspective of the absolute if you haven't had that insight, or you're not there yet, you could say.
It contains all function and all purpose. So words we're going to discuss, maybe we'll discuss things today. All the words and all the concepts are functions. They all have a subject and object. They all pertain to something. They all are about something happening. In being and life, there's nothing happening. There's no purpose, there's no meaning behind it. It's just simply everything.
Because any purpose of meaning, right, is just another story we make out of it, which can be a nice story, but it's still, he's showing it's a story.
It's so radically simple that even the word is, this is being, doesn't say what it is. Because if you say is, you automatically create is not. So this is and is not. Being is and is not. Life is and is not. The problem is that there's a contraction which feels is, I is, I am. And that makes everything else is and is not available anymore, is no longer, everything becomes it becomes real, and the reality that it's also not is lost.
That's really beautiful, because what he's pointing to there is, I heard this recent, I might comment on it later, but this recent podcast with Zen master Henry Shukman, and he talks about there's obviously this empty space here, right? Obviously there's this empty space here, and what he's talking about is this emptiness aspect, which comes online after thorough no self experience, is like, or permanent no self experience, I should say, which he is talking about here as well, is that the whole thing is that we experience fullness or form only when we're not in this deeper state. But especially with no self, but going there as well with spiritual awakening or different insight, non-dual awakening, with different stages, we get more and more insight and experiential feeling of the formless aspect, which is also there. Because, let's say, the quote-unquote masters, they experience both the self and the form and the no-self and the formlessness at the same time. So that's what he's pointing to here as well, the everythingness and the nothingness, which is, again, from the absolute perspective. And also his perspective, because he's aligned with that through his insight.
So when you have an is and you have I am, you have I have purpose. This has meaning and purpose. This is going somewhere, and I'm making it happen because I have that. I am that. Completely missing.
Oh, the I'm making it happen, the agency part. Wow, that's really nice.
This is the reality that being is all there is. Being is and is not. Is not is nothing, but is not nothing isn't nothing to what the brain would think of nothing as a black hole with nothing in it. It's just nothing, which is everything. It's inconceivable, completely beyond conception.
It's these different aspects of reality, right? So both the everything and the nothing aspect. So he's not saying that everything is nothing. He's not saying that nothing is everything. He's saying that these aspects simultaneously arise.
Functionless. Mm-hmm.
Are you speaking from that, it's not a point or a place or something, are you speaking from there now? Could you say that?
Not really, because if you say I'm speaking from here now, that gives a position to something that's not happening. But it's obvious that that's what's happening.
Okay.
So I'm speaking from that here. He's rejecting that because there's an I in that, right? There's just speaking happening. And Jim is notoriously good at these word games sort of trying to be very accurate in what he's trying to say in this absolute point. So when somebody says, but you, and he says, there's no you, right? So he likes to immediately dive in and correct somebody when they're making this type of normal wording, you could say.
Yeah.
I have to say you.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And I have to say that there is no you.
That's the problem of language.
I love this exchange, right? Because the person that's attending the event is saying to him, I have to say you're wrong. And his response is, and I have to say there is no you. So he's so chill with this, right? And the guy immediately is relaxed and laughs too. So that's, to me, like a very, very beautiful sign of his consciousness.
Okay.
You're speaking from there now too. That question comes from that as well.
I know.
Yeah.
But that doesn't solve my problems so far.
No, nothing
It
does.
seems, to me, it seems like that.
Yeah.
That's why
Just to go on further, the problem is being acting like a problem, appearing as a problem.
Yeah. The problem is only what you see in being.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that being a problem is also being a problem. It doesn't
How beautiful, how beautiful. This is so lovely.
matter. Being is everything. Being appears as time. Being appears as identification. Being appears as a problem. Being appears as suffering. Being appears as anger, as joy.
Okay, and that construction you spoke about then, interpret?
Is also being. Appearing as a contraction that it does all the other stuff.
And that creates a feeling of a problem.
But the feeling of a problem is also being.
Okay.
Being appears as nothing.
Being doesn't appear as nothing, being is nothing.
See, my problem is that I can't only say that it is like that. My problem is that I seem to know intellectually, I seem to know all that.
Yeah, it's undeniable, isn't it?
Still,
Yeah.
I'm sitting here and saying my problem is.
Yeah.
And that's the point where I'm stuck.
Yeah.
The funny thing is that when people tell him something like this, right, which is very common, that he is in his absolute perspective and his absolute way of looking at things, at least in the satsang, probably if you speak to him at the coffee machine, which I have, then, you can have a normal conversation with him. But in this mode, he's like in the absolute mode. So when you drop something like, I still have a problem, it's not like he tries to dissect the problem with you. It's like he just goes, yeah, you have a problem, yeah. And that's, he's thinking, of course, you're making up this problem and it's being having a problem. So there is no problem, right? That's his perspective, is there is no problem. You're creating a problem. And if you want to create a problem, just go ahead and create it, But he's not actually explaining that, but he's just staying in that absolute perspective.
I think I have the same problem.
And every effort I make to solve it increases it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm feeling. And that's kind of a dilemma,
That's very interesting, by the way, that he's saying like every effort I make to solve the problem, right, the problem of me, the more actually suffering I get, which makes total sense, has been my experience as well. The more I think I have a problem, the more I want to fix myself, actually, the more unaligned I am, so the more problematic is my state, right? Because there is no problem. You can just stop and be here and align yourself with what is. And then what is will change. But it takes a little bit, it takes trust, it takes time to actually stop with techniques or needing to change in any way.
Every action from the contraction is a confirmation that it's not being.
Yeah.
That is it?
A confirmation, a bestätigung,
Yeah.
that it's not it, that it wants to change something.
Yeah.
It's the non-recognition that this is
Doesn't like
everything.
what is, wants something
But
else.
there's a reality that there really is a contraction, there really is, and on top of that contraction, there's an I, or sort of a sense of a center there. That's just the way it is. That really happens. Well, it really appears to happen.
What happens? What really?
I love also the fact that he's talking about self and no self, and that no self recognition, or that it's a contraction, which I would say, I said before, like the sense of self is a sensation. And he's describing that as a contraction, which makes sense. And it's interesting because he's also not recognizing any other like language making it more special or something like that. I've had this talks with him, like, but isn't it better, like no self? And he said, yeah, well, it's different. It's like you're unlimited, but if you're an asshole, you're an unlimited asshole. So that's not per se, it doesn't have to be better than.
Nothing.
Nothing.
This.
What do you mean by this center?
Center, an I. A center. So a center is, I'm here and everything else is out there and everything is happening to me. Yeah. So there's something in here. Whereas in reality, there's nothing in here. There's space, just like this. There's no inner and outer, it's all space. It's all appearance. What happens is I have an I in here, and then this seems like it's solid and it's real. Everything seems like it's real, only real, instead of is and is not. And that's because of a center here. The center here then sees a center there, and a center there, and a center there.
That's been my experience as well. Like when the self dropped, there's no experience of anything better or worse or more here or there, So I get what he's saying there.
It's the same thing. It happens at the same time. It's the same thing. So I'd like to differentiate a couple of things because there's the ability to realize there's no me. There never was one. Everything's impersonal. But I realize that. So there's still a duality going on. There's also the ability to realize that there's no story and everything's empty. But I realize that. There's the actual stopping of the story is when the contraction dissipates. And the idea surrounding that contraction sees itself as having a position in a place.
What do you mean?
And what's interesting, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Just one. Each one of these things that happen, it always seems like you couldn't imagine how it could go on. That must be it. I realize nothing. How could anything else happen if there's only nothing? Well, what I've heard is that first off, I wouldn't doubt what happened. So if you have a glimpse of reality, of joy, although I don't see reality as pure joy or any of those things. I don't see it.
It felt like that.
Yeah. A glimpse of reality is extremely threatening to the contraction. Although there were all these realizations, and there's not a progression. I'm not trying to express a progression. I'm just explaining what happened here. There's not a progression. Even though I had realized that there's no me and there's no center, there never was one. When the center disappeared, it's still freaky. Because it's completely unexpected. Well, all I can say is what apparently happened here. And there were different realizations, and what I'm trying to share is there can be this I that has all these realizations, seems very special. I realize there's nobody and there never was. And that has nothing to do with the reality of the contraction disappearing.
So he's talking here, which I love that he's talking about this, is about theoretically understanding, which is in non-duality, especially this more radical style of non-duality. You have a lot of people that understand the message. So they understand the absolute perspective of things mentally with the self. So when you understand something, that is not per se your experience, right? So that's what he's saying here.
To me, that
I realize.
Totally realize.
Yeah.
There's no I.
Yeah. There's no me.
Yes, there's no me. Who constructed this center?
Nobody.
Because it is not there.
What's that?
Because it is actually not there.
It appears to be.
It appears to be. There is no.
Nothing's real.
Yeah.
And I know that now he would say nothing is real and nothing is unreal, right? So you don't want to create this perspective where on one side, let's say traditional Advaita and other non-duality styles have this focus on that reality is everything. And here in more quote-unquote radical non-duality, the focus is a little bit on everything is nothing. So reality is nothing. But both is happening simultaneously, that, like he said at the beginning of the video.
Would you describe the realization as more clarity afterwards, or how would you see the world differently? Or experience it differently?
When what?
After this realization, is it more about more clarity or a different
What are we
perception?
talking? Are we talking about when the contraction disappears?
Yeah, and afterwards.
Okay, so when the contraction disappears, it's realized that everything's empty. And it's not realized. It's recognized. It's not perceived. Because it makes it sound like I'm sitting here looking over there and I see an emptiness there. But what it is there's nothing projecting or putting anything into there. So there's nothing happening. So there's an end to that happening. There's an end of happening.
But obviously there's still feelings or some thoughts. Isn't that something happening?
Well, apparently everything's happening. If there wasn't something apparently happening or apparent time, these words wouldn't make sense. To make sense of a sentence, you need to put two moments together, or else you couldn't make sense of a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So apparent time is still happening.
Mm-hmm.
It just there's nothing put into it as far as it having meaning or purpose.
Mm-hmm.
There's no.
If you want to talk about the relative with Jim in this mode, you need to use the word apparent, because everything is an appearance. What he's saying here as well is like everything arises. It is still this emptiness. It is still, let's say, the ocean, but it is the wave. The wave arises, and it seems like a wave, but actually it's the ocean.
Need for it to be anything else than what it is. The contraction is a need to make everything fit into its concepts and ideas of what life's about, purpose and meaning.
There's no fear, there's no anger.
Of course there's fear and anger. There's everything. It's so hard to describe it in a way.
But
It happens.
if no one is there, who should feel?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I always thought there was supposed to be no fear. Because who's going to die? And the funny thing is there's no fear of death. So there's a recognition that this is death. This is death. Death doesn't change anything. Because nothing's dependent on what is or what's happening. So death is just what is, or being. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So why is there fear? I don't know. Maybe the brain holds certain programs and runs those programs of what this brain has experienced. I don't know. Because I can tell you there's another experience, a realization, where I detach from everything, where I stop thinking and I have the sense of being untouchable. And I think that's where a lot of these gurus these days are talking from. You know, they stop thinking, they're completely detached from everything. Anything can happen to them, and it doesn't affect them in a sense. They're completely detached. I think it's actually a psychological situation of disassociation. I think that...
Yeah, what he's talking about here is something that a lot of intense meditation practitioners talk about, like being able to be so concentrated that they can, for example, like it has happened in the past as a protest, like light themselves on fire and die without moving an inch. Yeah, it's quite extreme how you can teach yourself with meditation to detach like this. But that's not what he's talking about, of course, with this no self or loss of the center, as he calls it.
That's what who am I creates, is a sense of disassociation. And in that state, what the I can do there is I can realize death. So I can go beyond death. So in a detached state, I can become so detached from the experience of everything that I can feel like I am beyond death. And in that state, there's no fear. But I think that's because there's a detachment from everything. And that's not what I'm talking about.
So you would say that one of these gurus has still, although he claims or even believes something else, there must still be some kind of that construction to which this psychological effect happens.
Well, wherever the message is coming from, all that can be said is what's been seen there, or what's known there, or what's not known there. I do.
It's beautiful that he's saying, I'm talking from my realization, right? I haven't realized maybe what these other people have realized. Probably he's also not interested in that. So he's just talking from his experience.
Because we're talking about unknowing. In the end, it's only unknowing is what this is. This is unknowing. So if that message comes out and it talks about a person who can do something to get somewhere, then there must be something there that thinks that the person is real and it can do something to get somewhere. Does that make sense?
No.
So you asked about a psychological effect of things.
Yeah.
Well, I guess all I can say is whoever's giving the message, they're coming from wherever they're coming from.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And here, it doesn't seem like anything is excluded. Here, it seems like everything is included. Freedom doesn't have a particular image, a particular way of being.
So what's your intention to make these gatherings?
There's no intention. Being has no intention. I mean, what we're talking about is an identification, a contraction in the body that creates the appearance of time, that it creates the appearance of a life, which is my life, that has meaning and purpose, and that I need to use my free will and choice to make it happen. That can look like, a lot of people just live their life, never think about things like this. One thing it does is when there's a contraction here, there's a subtle discontent with existence, with the life, because it doesn't actually ever work in a way. Some people get enough that they don't feel that discontent, or that sensitive. So if they get a little bit of sensitivity, then they start to look for a solution to that. Drugs and alcohol are a good way to do it. Religion is a good way to do that, to sort of project it out there. And if you go further and further, if you get really deep into it, you realize religion and things like that don't work. I think that's why this message is becoming more popular, because it's found therapy and other things, religions aren't really working. And then you start looking for something else. Another, I don't know what I'm answering. I don't know what the question is.
So before you, in the story of the person that apparently is sitting here,
Yeah.
before that realization came, what was your relationship to things like that, to fear and anger?
So realizations are
Was
limited.
there enough, would you say that there was enough suffering to come to that realization, or something like that?
No. Realizations, as I was talking about before, are for me are limited. What the final thing is no center, or the loss of a center, the loss of a contraction position that says I'm here and you're there, that says I'm real and therefore you're real, and that what's happening is real. There's a loss of that. The realizations, what I was trying to say is that I just think it's fascinating that the I can have all these realizations and thinks it knows so much, and for it to be just completely irrelevant in light of the reality of there being no one, there being just space. An unbelievable reality of there just being space. There's only a space. That has, so there's nothing real here. There's nothing real there. It's all just what it is. It all just appears as it is. And because that's the last step, although there were no steps prior to that led up to that last step, there are no steps that lead up to that, because that contraction does anything it does, and everything it does, is only in support of itself, no matter what it thinks it's doing. So all the meditation, all the rice eating, and all the suffering, and all the other stuff that it thinks it's doing to get rid of itself, it's just confirming its own existence. And it has no capability of doing anything else.
So what is doing that? Grace, or how would you call it? You can't do something to achieve it.
Well, the thing is this, and that's where we get to a very interesting point, is that it doesn't need to be achieved because it's already what is. The identity is...
if this construction doesn't realize that it is, but it is also not because I don't know it.
This contraction, listen please, this contraction never realizes it. It never realizes it. It can't realize it because in the end, it never happened. What happens is something that never happened stops appearing to happen.
But
I think that's a very complicated way of saying the substance of the sense of self-feeling is already emptiness, right? But there is a definite change that can also be seen in brain scans and things like that.
question is what makes it stop appearing to happen.
But that would, see, the question confirms that it had a reality.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because it never had a reality. Just like a glimpse. And if you've ever had those glimpses you had, you can't remember a glimpse. The memory of a glimpse has no reality. The glimpse is now. It's this. That's the glimpse. Because what you jump into is infinity. And everything turns inside out. All there is infinity. All there is what is. All there is being.
Wow, that's really beautiful. All there is infinity. And thanks, Jim, for this video. And thanks for inspiring me. Know me. If you are interested in this type of non-duality, if you're interested in having a conversation about that with yours truly, then feel free to schedule a free coaching call where I can help you with some clarity and maybe answer some questions. I tend to have a more balanced way of looking at things, in my opinion, than some of the radical non-duality stuff. Although I see the truth in that, I also see that a lot of seekers tend to run against the wall with this type of message. But if you see it as the absolute perspective, which is beautiful, inspiring, and has a lot of truth, then you can click into that mentally by watching these type of videos. So it can be helpful on your journey. Also, I'm starting a monthly Q&A, but also inspiration session where we do certain assignments where I might share something and we can answer some questions for an hour and a half on a Sunday at the end of the month. If you're interested in that, also just send me an email. You can find my email on my website, keesblokcoaching.com. Again, thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't, and thank you so much. Bye.